for Herod wants to kill you. He said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me, listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem." Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you. And I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
And you may be seated. Grace and peace to you from the one who hears our cries and gathers us under God's wings of love. Amen. Well, we are now on our second Sunday in our walk through Lent with Jesus. And as we make our way through this season, I have a question for you today. What is it that causes you joy? What moves you to delight or makes you laugh out loud? Now, that might not seem like a very Lenty kind of question, but still I'm wondering. Maybe it's looking ahead at the week's forecast and seeing no blizzards or below zero temperatures. Or maybe it's a favorite TV show or a YouTube video that you watch again and again that just makes you laugh out loud. Or maybe it's watching your child singing or dancing on stage. Maybe it's when the phone rings or a text pops up and it's someone that you care about reaching out to connect. You can tell a great deal about a person, I think, but by what brings them joy and causes them delight. The converse of that is true as well. What causes you grief? What moves you to tears? Is it when the Vikings lose? Or when you lose that job that you knew was just perfect for you? Or when someone in your life is hurting and you just can't fix it? Or when someone you love is no longer in your life? Joy, laughter, delight, these are good indicators of what we love and what we value, but I believe that grief and tears are unfailing indicators of what we value most, our most cherished people, and our deepest loves. And so I paid attention this week when I heard Jesus grieving, lamenting in this morning's gospel. Jesus laments over the city of Jerusalem, a city he loves. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who were sent to you. How often I have wanted to gather your people as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you. Matthew says Jesus wept over Jerusalem. Luke doesn't use the words Jesus wept, but I think it's hard to listen to these words and imagine Jesus saying them without also seeing tears in his eyes and hearing a catch in his voice. Jesus is on the road out in Galilee. He's a long way from Jerusalem, but already the storm clouds are starting to gather. Herod's out to kill you, warn the Pharisees. They tell Jesus that Herod, the most powerful person in Galilee, is out to get him. And Jesus, he just brushes it off, dismisses Herod as nothing but a fox. But then Jesus falls into lament, grief, mourning, not over Herod's plans for Jesus, not over his eventual death and suffering in Jerusalem, but over the state of the city of Jerusalem itself. Jesus speaks about the prophets of Israel. And who were Israel's prophets? They were spokespersons for God, human beings who were given unusual insight into God's purposes. The prophets were willing to call even powerful people, kings and high priests, to account, reminding them that they served under a just and righteous God who was going to hold them accountable for their abuses of power, particularly their abuses to the poor and vulnerable. But too often the people of Israel ignored, ridiculed, dismissed the prophet's words, and instead they chose fear and greed and scarcity, even turned to other gods, rather than living in God's abundant love and grace and providing. And this breaks Jesus' heart. And with his heart breaking, Jesus laments, he mourns, he grieves the distance between all that God desires and the way things are. I think that Jesus here is teaching us something about what it means to live our lives in a relationship to God. Jesus, in his lament today, is building upon the traditions of his people. Think of the Psalms. In so many of them, we find communal or personal lament. Something is wrong, whether it's illness or misfortune or a national disaster. And then comes the outcry, a turning of this internal pain into speech expressed. To read the Psalms, to pray the Psalms, is to groan along with a world that's broken and distressed. We don't often practice lament. Instead, our response to the brokenness in our lives and relationships and world is to ignore it if possible, or numb ourselves when we can't, or distract ourselves. It's a chin-up kind of culture. We're also great at minimizing. In the face of intense pain or grief, what do? We try cheering people up. Be strong, don't worry, you'll get through this. Or we say ridiculous things like, when God closes a door, he opens a window, which only makes the person in pain want to shove the person who just said that out the open window. You see, none of it really works. In fact, the opposite is true. It makes those who are in pain feel all the more alone, and it ignores or minimizes the gulf that exists between what could be and the hurt and wrong that is. Lament, on the other hand, acknowledges. It dares to measure the distance between where we are and where God would have us be. It names the grief of all that cannot be fixed. Lament is a form of prayer because it acknowledges not only the pain, but by bringing God into it, acknowledges that God is also there in the midst of it. One night, many years ago, we left our kids one night with a babysitter while Peter and I went to the church council meeting. And that night when we came home, the kids were all asleep, but the sitter told us that Sarah, our youngest, had fallen when she was out rollerblading. And he said that she had scraped her knee, but she seemed just fine. After the sitter left, Peter and I sat up in the living room discussing the ins and outs of the church council meeting. And while we were debriefing, our youngest, then 6 years old, Sarah, walked into the living room crying and holding her arm. And one look at that arm and we knew that it was broken. We called the doctor, and while we waited for a response, I asked Sarah, "Did you tell the babysitter that you hurt your arm?" "Yes," she answered tearfully. "Well, what did he say?" I asked. She said, "He told me, just try not to think about it." Ignoring, minimizing our pain, the pain of the world, or the pain in the lives of others, does not make it go away or bring any healing. Lent is a season when the church encourages us to name the pain, the brokenness, the distance that exists between God's love for us and all the ways that we and the world fall short of living into it. Lent isn't afraid to have us acknowledge the suffering in our lives and in the world. But Lent doesn't leave us there. Lent encourages us to lean into the one who comes to us in the form of a cross. And there on the cross, Jesus, in his suffering, meets the pain, the loss, the sin, the brokenness of our world with life-changing love. Jesus never once tries to cheer us up or tell us to try not to think about it. Rather, on the cross, Jesus meets us and says to us, God is here. You are loved. And somehow, my love will be enough. This love of God in the cross is healing. Not always a physical healing, but it is a love that brings wholeness. This love of God on the cross will always bring us to new life. Jesus says that he longs to gather Jerusalem like a mother hen who gathers her chicks. Her love for her brood is fierce, and she will do anything, even sacrifice her own body to save her children. Jesus speaks these words, gives this example with his eyes on the cross. He is determined to love this world and to complete this work, which will be finished on the third day, the day of resurrection. This week on Friday morning, my phone rang about 8 o'clock in the morning. It was a member of this congregation. How are you? She asked. Fine, I said, knowing this was not why she had called. So I asked, what's on your mind? And then her voice broke with emotion, and she said, essentially, oh, New Zealand, New Zealand, how can the world be this far from what God intends? And then she apologized for her tears, which we all do so often. But I asked her not to, because if we cannot name the pain and measure the distance between where we are and where God would have us be, then we cannot imagine that God's love for us and for this world is enough. If we cannot honestly name the pain, then we cannot imagine the power in God's love to make a difference, to be life-changing, to be world-changing, to bring new life. As I've worked with this Bible passage this week, I've wondered, what if Jesus here is also showing us what it means for us to be a community that gathers and lives and moves in his name? We are followers of Jesus, who longs not to gather only Jerusalem, but all the children of the world, just as a mother hen gathers her brood under her wings. Jesus calls us to be a community of love and belonging, to spread the wings of Jesus' love and proclaim in our words and in our actions that there is a place for all in the shelter of God's love. Jesus calls us to be a community that names and stands with people in their pain. And this includes our Muslim brothers and sisters, children of God, who were so brutally attacked this week in New Zealand. We are called in Jesus' name to be a community that makes room for lament and still dares to live with hope. For we know that we are deeply loved by God, and that this love is life-changing. For only love can lead us forward. Only love can bring healing to this world. Only love will keep us from fear and hate that destroys. Only love can bring us from death to life. On the cross, Jesus, the mother hen, spreads his arms in love, longing to gather a sinful, broken, grieving world into the embrace of God's love and goodness and providing. And in this love is healing, hope, and new life for each one and for the world. Amen.